did this, or because Lewis and Clark used a branding iron. The native ownership of the lands they had lived on for thousands and thousands of years was completely ignored because European Christians were superior. You guys all knew that, right? I mean, Indians were heathens, right? Just like the Canary Islanders were blamed. Just like the African indigenous peoples were blamed. They don't have any laws, they don't speak our language, they don't have coined money, they have no agriculture, which that's a lie, isn't it? All native people in North America engaged in agriculture, but of course that's completely ignored. Europeans chose not to see that. And that's another great lie that the court repeats in those later two cases I told you about, that the Cherokee people were not farmers, that the Cherokee people couldn't support themselves. That's what the court said in the 1831 case, Cherokee Nation versus Georgia. Well, it's an absolute, total lie. The Cherokee are fairly related to my own tribe, and we planted corn, the three great crops of corn, beans, and squash everywhere we went. And we grew 80% of our caloric intake. But are we taught that? Are we taught about this American Indian civilizations that built the pueblos in the Southwest, that built the city of Cahokia? How many people in here know what Cahokia is? Wow, more than normal. So that's about 8 or 10 of them. Most people have never heard of Cahokia. It was a city, probably of the Adena culture, in 1200 to 1400 AD of 40,000 people, with a living in a town completely surrounded by wooden palisade walls. And they had temple mounds, and they had leaders that lived on top. 40,000 people. Well, you know I know Americans know it because it was really far away. Oh, no, wait a minute. It's only 8 miles from St. Louis, isn't it? 8 miles from St. Louis. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's smack dab. Okay, I digress. I'm talking, man, I'm on slide 1. But my point is, look how American history purposely ignores Indian people, the cultures they had, what they developed. The Pueblo people built, if you've ever been to Chaco Canyon, you can see from the air, way up in the air, the roads that they built. 300 miles of paved roads 30 feet wide, because Chaco Canyon was probably a religious and ceremonial center. If you have ever been there, in Pueblo Bonito, which is still standing, 650 room, 5-story high, brick adobe type structure, your mouth gapes open. You go, well, who built this? Must have been the aliens. Because we aren't taught much about it in school, are we? How many of you know about the Egyptian pyramids? Well, we all know, of course. Why are we taught that, but we aren't taught about the pyramids that American Indian ancestors built? The largest, American Indians built earthen structures, not out of stone. But the largest mound in what's now the United States is at Cahokia, and it covers 14 acres of ground, larger than the Great Pyramid of Cheops in Egypt. But we know all about those Egyptian pyramids, but we don't study American. Okay, I'll digress. I'm now on another pet peeve, right? But part of it was because we wanted to say, and we still want to believe today, that Indian cultures were savage. They didn't really own their land. They didn't know what land meant. And they just frolicked through the woods and lived off the bounty of the forest like a wood nymph. That's, and, you know, I'll give you a legal term for that. That's BS. Indian people modified their cultures, or their environments. They used fire. They developed plants. They grew their own crops. But we pretend not to know that because I think we want to feel comfortable about how the United States took everything. But anyway, so after this history that I just told you about, the division of the world for the Spanish and the Portuguese, the court goes a little further. So let me just finish real quickly, because how did the English get involved with that? They were excluded by the Pope, as was France. But they developed new thinking about this international law. And in fact, maybe I'll save that, the rest of that, when I get to the elements of the doctrine of discovery. So the court sets out this history that I just told you about, and it says this is how Europeans divided up the country. This is the law our 13 colonies used. When the Dutch were here in New York, when the Swedish were here in eastern Pennsylvania, when the Russians were in Alaska, when the Spanish were all across the Southwest, this is the legal principle that Europeans lived by. where they showed up and planted their flags and crosses, Native people immediately lost the complete ownership of their lands. Now, boy, where do you live? Do you have a nice house? Because I'm going to come over to your house tonight. The Bob Miller flag, the Bob Miller religious symbol. Now, I'm surely superior to her, right? Because I'm a lawyer. I'm a professor. Well, she's a heathen savage, and I get to take her house, right? Everybody laughs, because what are you going to do? 911? Or get a gun and shoot me. And she'd probably justifiable homicide, because I must be a raving lunatic to think that I just can claim your house. Usually when I'm traveling elsewhere, I tell them, well, we're Oregonians. But I guess that doesn't work here, since most of you are probably Oregonians. Well, I'm from Portland, though. Oh, we know I'm superior to you. Okay. Now, we laugh. That's what Europeans said for 500 years. Their rights dominated over the savage, heathen people who didn't know how to use land and just lived off the bounty of the forest. That was political theory, justification for what Europeans wanted. Free land, free assets. So what did, after the court says that our country was settled on this principle of discovery, what did that mean? Tribes immediately lost some of their property rights. Well, what right did they lose? Well, the court tells us. They lost the right to sell their land to whomever they wished. You already know who won this case, don't you? You already know, don't you? The English grandfather of Mr. Johnson, the tribe didn't possess the legal property right to sell him the property. Tribes could only sell their land to the European/American government that held the discovery power, a property right. Now let me tell you something that probably most of you already know. Obviously I like her house because I'm trying to steal it from her, but I can buy it legally in some ways, right? If she and I were to sign a contract that's called an option, and I paid her $100, she might agree to offer her house to me first if she ever chooses to sell her house. That's called a right of first refusal. That's part of American property law. Any real estate agent will tell you ad nauseum what the right of first refusal is. Now, if I could trick her, or if I paid her $1,000, maybe she would sign a contract with me that said if she ever sells, she will only sell to me. That would be the doctrine of discovery. Because what the United States had, or France, England, Spain, when they showed up, magically acquired a very valuable property right in which the native people, I'm calling you native person, can only sell their land to me. And that is exactly what Thomas Jefferson told chiefs in the White House over and over, and you can read it in his own handwriting. He was the writingest president we ever had. There's a 20-volume set from, whatever. You can read what Jefferson wrote. And when chiefs visited him in the White House, he talked to them about things like this. We would like to buy your land someday. But he also told them, you can live on your lands forever if you wish. But if you ever choose to sell, you can only sell to the United States. And the Jefferson administration, the 8 years he was president, he signed 28 treaties with tribes, buying millions of acres of land. But in 8 of those treaties, and don't forget, I cite them in the book. Everything I'm telling you is in the book, so you need a copy. I'm just certain of that. In 8 of those treaties, the language of the doctrine of discovery is right in the treaty. The tribe agreed. I mean, who knows what the tribe understood they were signing and agreeing to, because it was in English, of course, wasn't it? It was being interpreted to them in their own language, and they were having to trust that the American representative was telling the truth. Who knows what they understood the treaty to be, but anyway, reading those treaties in English today, they say the tribe will only sell its lands to the United States if it ever sells. It will not sell to a foreign country, will not sell to a foreign citizen, it will not sell to an American citizen, only to the United States. Now that was 18 years before Johnson v. McIntosh. In fact, Jefferson was still alive when this opinion was rendered, folks. And John Marshall was his 4th cousin. And Thomas Jefferson hated John Marshall's guts. Because John Marshall was a Federalist. He was a supporter of a strong federal government. He was a good friend of George Washington. How do you think he got on the Supreme Court? It always helps to be a friend of the president. And Jefferson, as we know, was an anti-federalist. He believed in a small, weak federal government. So he didn't like most of what Marshall wrote. And he critiqued lots of the opinions that Chief Justice Marshall wrote. Jefferson wrote nothing about this case at all. I was unable to find, you can now word search that 20-volume set. I have word searched that. I cannot find that Jefferson has written a word about Johnson v. McIntosh. So you know how I interpret that. Well, he must have agreed with the opinion. Because those opinions he disagreed with, he wrote about them. He and John Adams, as you might know, in the last decade or so of their life, they were writing each other a lot. And there's a 3-volume set of letters you can read between Jefferson and Adams. And they discuss several Supreme Court cases. But they don't mention this. And what I argue in my book is that's because Jefferson understood this doctrine of discovery. He just called it by the word preemption that we'll see in a minute. What else did... Oh, before I leave this, folks, tribes own 56 million acres of land in the lower 48 states today. But they are not the fee simple absolute owners. See Johnson v. McIntosh. This is not just an interesting relic of American history, a fun fact to know about what those darn colonialists were up to. This is still the law as regarding tribes in the United States. That 56 million acres of land that tribes own in the lower 48 states, they cannot sell that land without the permission of the United States. They cannot lease that land without the permission of the United States. And I worked for several tribes at their housing departments. They can't even develop their own land. They can't build housing for their own tribal citizens without the permission of the United States. Well, why? Doctrine of Discovery, Johnson v. McIntosh. The United States to this very day is still deemed to be the legal owner of Indian lands, and the tribes are the beneficial owners under the United States. In the lower 40, well, counting Alaska, so in 49 states, individual Indian people own what are called trust lands, 11 million acres of it. Trust, well, that tells you right away that there's a trustee. Well, the trustee is the United States. And those 11 million acres, those individual Indian families cannot sell their land, lease their land, or develop their own land without the permission of the United States. Because the United States is also deemed to be the legal owner of those 11 million acres. The Indian families are the beneficial owner. Why? Johnson v. McIntosh. So that's why we start teaching federal Indian law with this class, or this case, because it still applies. It's still the law in the United States today. And so this